to you this morning. Jeff Waldon. I've been a wildlife biologist for 30 some years. Worked at Virginia Tech for quite a number of those. My wife and I moved up here just west of Barboursville in 2017, and I started working with a colleague that I've known for quite some time, Mike Collins, out at the Center for Natural Capital, who at the time they were based in Orange. They've since moved out to the mill at Rapidan. One of the projects that I started work with Mike on was this idea of the dam at Rapidan. So what I'm going to do this morning is give you, and I think this is actually the first public presentation about this project. We'll do a little bit of an update of where we're at with it. And I can talk about certainly pros and cons and other issues. But everyone needs to understand we're right at the beginning, and we're just starting to get the planning together. So I'm going to do something a little scary here. I'm going to try and share my screen. We'll see what happens, because you just never know, right? And there we go.
Good. Yay!
Yeah. So fertile for the morning. All right, so I'm going to. I got to figure out how to advance the slide. There we go. This is a picture of the dam at Rapidan, Virginia, that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. If you've ever driven by there, it's kind of hard to miss. Our offices are actually located in that building that you see in the picture all the way on the left. Those offices are being slowly renovated. And we've got all of our stuff in there. So we're basically operating out of that building right now. The mill itself is not occupied at this point, which is a nice way of saying it's kind of a derelict as it sits there today. But we have some plans and hopes and dreams for how that's going to get used someday. In the meantime, we have this very large structure, which is the dam itself. It's a privately owned structure. We have a purchase contract for it that we're paying off a note to complete. The dam and a couple acres on the Culpeper side. So the person taking the photograph here is actually standing on the Culpeper side of the river, looking over at the Orange side. So there's a little bit of room on the Culpeper side that is bisected by the road, and there's all kinds of access issues, but there is a little bit of room on that side. The objective of this project is to restore fish stocks. That's a simple answer to the question of why. So historically, there would have been a very large and a robust run of shad and alewife up the river, and stripers too, up the river on an annual basis. Those fish tend to run upstreams from the Chesapeake, and they lay eggs, breed and lay eggs in the upper part of the watershed. So right now, that breeding habitat is not accessible because they can't get over this dam. Now there is a little fish ladder that was installed some years ago that is all the way over at the base of the mill. That fish ladder is insufficient for shad and alewife, but it's, or excuse me, not alewife, but herring. Insufficient for shad and herring and stripers, but it is probably okay for some other species that are freshwater species, or eels, or other stuff. That some species of fish are very adept at getting over obstructions, and some are pretty lousy at it. Shad in particular are notoriously lousy at getting over things. So the point of this is to get the fish from below the dam to above the dam. Now there's the obvious way to do that, which is you take out the dam. There's unobvious way to do it, which is some sort of very, very extensive and expensive fish laddering system. And there's something in between, which is removing a portion of the dam or some part of the dam that would reduce the flow through that part of the river so that the velocity of the water was low enough that these fish can get through. So the dam itself was built in 1936, thanks to Alan Shotwell, who is our local historian. He's gone through and dug up all kinds of cool pictures and other materials about, well, Rapidan in general, but he has this one picture of the dam itself as it was being constructed in 1936. So the point of this picture is that it's become a part of the aesthetic of the community for sure, but it's a relatively recent addition. So the other picture on here is a very important picture, and that is a striper that ran up from Chesapeake Bay and was caught by an angler at the base of the dam last summer. So we know for a fact that there are these anadromous fish running up the river and are getting as far as the dam. There's also some data that the Smithsonian Institute has been collecting over the last several years using a technique where they collect water samples and they analyze the water samples for DNA. And they've actually found herring DNA at the base of the dam as well. And I've got a picture of their map here on the next slide. So the dam right now is currently used for a really low output hydroelectric application. So there is water that runs from the pool of the dam in through the mill, through a turbine, comes out the back side. It's extremely small. It's owned by obviously the current owners, owned and operated. They're not, I don't think they're particularly concerned about the lack of water if the pool in the dam is lowered. At least that's what they've told us. So the dam is on a landscape basis is extremely important, and it's extremely important because there's only two obstructions between Big Meadows up in Shenandoah National Park and Chesapeake Bay, and this is the big one. The other one is up at the town of Orange, and that one has been a number of years ago was modified very substantially to put in a really serious fish laddering system that the experts tell me should be sufficient for getting fish past Orange.
And do you mean Spicer's Mill?
No, it's at the. I've not been up there myself yet, and I need to. But it's the water intake crib dam. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, it's Spicer's, Jamie. It's a town's diversion barrier at Spicer's.
Okay, yeah. So so that one is again, according to the biologists and the people that do this, appears to not be a concern. This one, however, is one of the highest priority dam challenges in the entire Chesapeake Bay. It's ranked as what they call a tier 1 dam. There's only a couple of those in Virginia, and this is the highest priority dam project in Virginia right now. Okay, so let's keep moving. Right, so this is a map from the Smithsonian folks out at Edgewater. And I put in a "You Are Here" arrow that shows you where the Rapidan Mill Dam is, just above the black square. What this is trying to depict is all their data that they've been collecting from 2016 and forward about their DNA evidence for herring. So they found herring evidence at all of the blue dots that are on the map, and they found and they've sampled but not found herring DNA at the black dots. So their thinking is that everything that's in blue is available to herring as breeding habitat. Everything that's in red is blocked for some reason. So you can see at Rapidan Mill Dam is a choke point for the entire Upper Rapidan system. So it is representing a fish passage impediment that essentially blocks off all the stream miles that are in that red area on the far west of the map. If you zoom way in and add up all those miles, it comes out to 541 miles of stream. So it's a lot. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration and the other agencies that work on this kind of stuff, they have goals that they try to achieve each year, and their annual goals, I think, are like between 15 and 20 miles a year. This one is 541 miles, so it's off the charts in terms of importance. So one more slide, and then I'll take some questions. The center is, of course, has moved to the mill at Rapidan now. As I said before, we've entered into this purchase contract for the dam and the property on the Culpeper side. I've got crew coming maybe even this week, presumably we can get in the water, to do some preliminary sediment sampling. And that's important because these dams tend to trap sediment. We don't feel like it's trapped a whole lot of sediment compared to other dams in the region. But you still got to test the sediment. So you got to make sure that there's nothing nasty in there that has to be dealt with. So that step will get accomplished very soon. The next step after that is we're raising funds to do the preliminary engineering work, which would include a pretty extensive mapping requirement using sonar to figure out how big is the pool, how deep is the pool, how much sediment's in the pool. And then from that, we can go to DEQ and we can go to the other agencies to get our permits to go forward, presuming that we have the money to do that. So it's a combination of a planning fundraising phase that we're in right now. Initial data collection is underway. Fundraising for the remainder of the planning work is the next step. So at that, I'm going to just open it up for questions. And I have to figure out how to unshare my screen. Yeah, okay, stop share. There we go. Nice.
Right.
Nice.
Who said this would be hard? Okay.
Right.
So I've got basically all morning, or as much as you all can stand, to talk about this. One question that came up before everybody got on the call was this issue of flood control and flood management. And the dam in Rapidan is at a natural rock outcrop on both sides of the river. So it was built at a choke point on the river. That's not going to change. No matter what you do to the dam, that's not going to change, right? So now the dam is 12 feet tall. The 12-foot elevation change on the river levels is far below the level that it takes to actually flood anything in the village of Rapidan. So, to do a flood control dam there, you'd probably have, this is just me guessing, you probably have to raise that dam another 20 feet. And even that probably wouldn't suffice in all floods. Removing the dam or heavily modifying the dam should actually, I would think, reduce the flood risk because you don't have any sort of restriction there, or at least less of a restriction. So in my opinion, and I'm no engineer, no expert, the flood issue is not really something that we can address with the existing dam. You know, flooding as a watershed event, absolutely we can address in other ways. The way you do that is you slow water down in the watershed before it gets to Rapidan. And that can be done with land cover change, so improving the number of acres in the watershed that have vegetative cover, particularly forest cover, is pretty well established as a strategy for reducing flood intensities. In both the intensity and the duration over which the flood occurs. So, and we've got some other plans that we're working on in that regard, but I don't think the floods at the dam are something that we can have much of an impact on. So, did me rambling give everybody enough time to think of questions they want to ask?
Actually, if I can pose two questions, clarifications maybe. You'd mentioned something about black water, and I didn't know what you meant by black water. It was earlier on in your discussion. And the other question is about the DNA of alewives or something like that. That
Sure.
Smithsonian's mentioned.
The DNA question I certainly explain more. The Blackwater reference is probably just me fumbling around, before 8:30 in the morning and mashing words together. So sorry. If anybody can think of what I was talking about at that point, let me know.
Hey, Jeff, the Blackwater thing that Jamie is referring to may have been when you showed the watershed map and you showed the black lines showing that, so if that's the case, I would want to interrupt you, but
sure.
People that, are in our line of work, they probably look like, what the heck is that? You might just go back and go over that map and just explain that,
Sure.
where Fredericksburg is, and this goes into the Chesapeake Bay, and this is the upper Rappahannock, and a little bit about that.
Okay, I can do that. Second.
The DNA.
Right.
So I guess my question is, why would they look for DNA versus putting an electric probe in the water and taking a sample that way of species?
Come on now. Hang on one second. Trying to get there. All right.
Yeah.
So, can you see this map now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So the reason that the Smithsonian has been doing these water samples is that for really two things. One is they're trying to develop this technique, right? So DNA sampling is a brand new thing in the conservation world. It's being used in a lot of different ways. In this particular context, they're trying to work out a technique where they can essentially survey for species without having to actually catch them. And the reason that that's important is it's way cheaper and easier to go out and collect a water sample than it is to put a boat in the water and a crew on the boat and get the boat out there at the right time of the year and do electroshocking to turn up the fish. The problem you get with that is that the fish may not be there that day, or the weather may block you out of your survey. I mean, there's all kinds of logistical challenges that go with that, and it's extremely expensive. With this DNA technique, they literally can go out there with a jug, grab water, take it to the lab, and figure out whether there's herring there. So that's the reason that they're doing that technique. It's just they can do a lot more samples in a lot more places and a lot faster and a lot less expensive. So the black dots on this particular map are places where they actually sampled. They took a water sample and they did not find any DNA for herring. So the blue dots are where they took a water sample and they did find DNA for herring. So what that tells me is that there are herring in the Rapidan all the way up to the dam. So that strengthens our argument that the dam is restricting the use of the rest of the river. So
I have a quick question.
yes, ma'am.
So you say that it's being sampled at the dam, but have any of those red waterways been sampled to see if in fact there's DNA up in those red waterways?
Yes, there are. And
yes, there are samples, or yes,
there were samples. However, this data is from 2016. The samples were taken in 2016. The samples they've taken since then are actually above the dam as well. So the thinking is that, and they have not found any so far, they've not found any herring DNA above the dam. So the thinking is that if herring can't get past the dam, there should not be any DNA above the dam, obviously. So, and that's been borne out so far with some of this other data. Now, if we do this talk, 6 months from now, I should have the updated stuff. The researchers at the Smithsonian were finishing up their publication with the new data. So,
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Sam. So to the north, the black lines, what would keep it? So if I'm reading it right, there's no river herring present in any of those black lines either.
That's right. They're blocked.
So
blocked by a dam, some other kind of dam, or obstruction of some sort.
What's the difference between black and red?
Okay, so the black are places where they sampled and did not find any DNA. So the presumption is that there's no herring above those sampling sites. The red is places where they sampled, they found DNA, but there's nothing above that, or there's not presumed to not be anything above that. I think one of the interesting parts to this is, not that it matters necessarily in Orange County, but the far northern part of the map, which is the Rappahannock that goes all the way up to the Culpeper area. So we've got herring that have made it literally all the way to the top of the watershed. And anecdotally, we've got reports of people catching shad that far up as well, from our friends over at the Friends of the Rappahannock. So I think it's pretty clear that these fish can use all that habitat if they get to it. The question now is, can they get to it?
Jeff, I have another question. And I see there's a ladder at Spicer's Mill, and I don't know how effective it is. Have there been any studies on ladder designs that would allow everything from eel to striper to pass through relatively unscathed?
Yeah, there are. And the one at the Spicer's Mill is one of those. So it's the state of the art as far as I can tell. Now it needs constant maintenance, and it's got its own challenges, but if it's operated correctly, it should be sufficient.
And who owns that ladder? Is it the county, or town?
I think it's the town. Mike, do you know who owns it?
On mute. Sorry, it's a town.
Yep.
I don't know that for a fact, but I can't imagine DWR has any ownership of it. It's
no, DWR.
Town owns a diversion barrier. They would own the fish ladder.
Yeah, Mike, I believe you're right. I was on a committee a couple of years ago, and yeah, I'm pretty sure the town owns it.
That fish ladder, there's a name for it, Jamie. There's among these state-of-the-art ladders, it's called a Denil. I think it's DENIL. You can look it up online. But the guy who is with DWR, who I think is Jeff, you know him maybe, but he's like the guy that says, this is what you want to do if you want to have a fish ladder that's going to work. And when the town went in and built the diversion barrier, was that like in 2002, 2003? That was put in at that time.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, he's referring to Alan Weaver, who is the state fish impediment coordinator for DWR. So, and Alan's been doing this his entire career, and I would rely on his advice in that regard.
So one other thing to mention about this that also, you know, folks may be interested in this, you know, even though that facility is state of the art, just like any infrastructure, it's got to be maintained. And so, you know, in a separate project, we're doing a feasibility study for the Rapidan Blueway, which are canoe kayak public access points, and one of them at Spicer's. That's a whole other story. But we've been working with the town, and we're visiting that site frequently. And the town is having trouble maintaining that fish ladder adequately for a variety of reasons. And so, in addition to this project, looking at fish pastures there is a much more minor issue, but nevertheless an issue about figuring out how we can help the town with the partnership with DWR to fully maintain that ladder so it's actually doing, you know, what it was designed to do.
But it's kind of a moot point, isn't it? Because until there's a ladder at Rapidan, won't make a difference.
Yeah, for these species,
For these
it is.
fish.
I mean, it's useful for other species.
Right.
There are, it'll sound funny, but there are actually some endangered mussels in the river.
Even the debris.
And needless to say, the mussels don't get up and migrate up the river on their own. Their life cycle includes using fish hosts as a way to move the larval mussels around, called Glochidia. So the fish that move the mussel larvae around actually can be blocked by impediments as well. So I'm sure when the orange fish ladder was put in, there was some the mussel populations had something to do with it because they're the federal listed ones, and some state ones as well.
Jeff, David here. Is your recommendation to put in a sophisticated fish ladder or to take out the dam? And if the ladder, how would that affect kayaking up and down the river?
Right. So there's the pros and cons, isn't it? Right. So yeah, we could do a really involved, expensive fish ladder at Rapidan, and it would. I have no idea how much it would cost. It'd be well north of $1 million, no doubt. And it wouldn't address any of the canoe access issues on the river, which right now are there is no canoe access for all intents and purposes. The dam itself, is a 1930s era concrete structure, and granted, it's a big hunk of concrete, but you still have to maintain it, right? So, and there's a liability that goes with it, and there's all kinds of implications for owning a dam, which the current landowners certainly recognize, and we recognize. So, the day the state comes along and says, "Well, your dam is cracking, and you need to fix it," well, somebody's going to be on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars of maintenance costs. I don't know when that day will be, but it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So there's the choices here are do nothing, which involves, the liability of the maintenance and the restriction of fish habitat and restriction of canoe access and all the other problems. Do a fish ladder, which is super expensive and doesn't deal with all those things, or do some sort of a modification to the dam that could be remove the entire thing, could be remove some portion of it. The only criteria there for the how much do you remove question is that you need to remove enough so that the water velocities are low enough that the fish can actually get past it. Also, you don't want to remove just a portion of it and turn it into a whitewater situation for canoeists. I don't think anybody that canoes down the Rapidan is going to want that much excitement. So you basically got to remove a portion of it sufficient to meet your objectives.
The other thing to mention that probably most folks on the call know, but some may not be familiar with, is that, when we talk about herring, stripers, these kinds of fish, they're not like salmon. They don't jump.
Yeah.
So, this is why this issue about you've got to have, a low grade, because they stay in the water when they, move upriver, upstream.
Right.
I have a question. I understand the snakehead population is pretty
Mhm.
prevalent there at the dam. And I understand that that's also a very invasive species. What's happening to the heron now because of the snakeheads, and what would happen if modification were made that allowed, I'm assuming the snakeheads can't get upstream, I'm not sure, but I understand they're big and prevalent right there at the dam. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Right. So we had that question come up, and we asked the snakehead expert in the state, John Odenkirk, colleague for many years, asked John what his thoughts were on it. His thinking was there probably are snakeheads already above the dam. Snakeheads can wiggle around stuff, pretty effectively, but they don't stay up there. And what he's seeing is that they'll get pulses of snakeheads running up and down the river, but then they never stay. They work their way back down to slower water, and particularly slower water near brackish water. So they're getting obviously a lot of snakeheads down at Fredericksburg and places, in that part of the bay. They've seen snakeheads as far north as Sperryville, but it's he doesn't feel like that's where the problem's going to be. He feels like you're always going to find a couple, but it's never going to be a full-blown population of snakeheads up there. So yeah, I'm sure it'll be a thing. Somebody will catch a snakehead way upstream, probably in the spring. But he's of the opinion that it's not going to have much of an impact on the river.
Do you think they're having an impact on the herring population overall?
Probably. Well, this is just me guessing now, so take it for what it's worth. I'd be surprised, just because the snakehead population is relatively small relative to the massive herring populations that occur already occur in the bay, and could occur and be even larger going forward if we got a lot of the breeding habitat available to them again. The herring fishery was immense in Virginia and Maryland, going back 100 years ago. It was a full-blown commercial fishery where there were a whole fleet of fishing boats that went and targeted herring. And that's pretty much collapsed since then for a number of different reasons, but the big reason is the breeding habitat's not available anymore. So you can say the same thing about shad. Right now there's an emerging commercial fishery and a growing recreational fishery for shad, both in the Potomac and in the James. The shad run at just above Washington, D.C. is apparently huge. It's really has recovered nicely. And that reminds me too that one of the things that we probably want to pursue, if we get this problem resolved, is they call it an imprinting project. And that's a fancy way of saying we'd be trying to imprint shad fry from other watersheds and imprint them on the water characteristics farther up in the Rapidan. So basically, it's a way, if you release larval shad far up in the Rapidan, they will imprint on the water characteristics there, and then when they come back to breed, they'll come back to that part of it. And so it's a way to jumpstart a run. What I'd hope to do is something like they've done up in the Potomac, where they've incorporated school kids in science classes into raising out dry and then releasing them, which has been wildly successful up there and been a fantastic environmental education component to their curriculum. So that's way down the road. We've got a lot of things to do between now and then, but that's the hope for the long term.
This is Amy Tutterman. I have a question about the water levels. If the dam goes away, I assume somebody knows how many millions of gallons of water flow through there every day. And I'm just thinking, there's agriculture on both sides of the river down below the dam. How's removing the dam going to impact the day-to-day water levels? And then when the floods come, what will happen?
Yeah, so the dam as it sits there right now is pretty much they call it a run of the river dam. So basically everything flowing in is flowing out the back end, or going over the dam. So there's really no difference in the water levels as a result of the dam either being there or not being there. The flooding part to it, I don't think is going to have much of an impact, because it's just it's not big enough to have much of an impact on flood control, for sure. And removing it is probably going to make it less likely to flood. What little impact it does, it would have even less impact. So you can imagine what the river looks like above the dam, which I'm sure everyone has seen. The river in various places along the through its course, and what it looks like below the dam. I don't think there's going to be any change either above or below. I think the only change is the place where the actual dam pool is right now is going to look a whole lot more like what the river looks like above the dam or below the dam. So got to remember, the river was there long before there was a dam. And it's basically just going to go back the way it was.
I'm sure that Bob and Gary and Beth Seal are interested in the kayaking about up and down. What would happen to that if you take out the dam?
Well, it would open it up, obviously. Now it's like we said before, that there is a pinch point in the river there naturally. So there's a rock outcrop on the Culpeper side, a rock outcrop that the mill is attached to. So it's going to be a fairly quick run through there, regardless of what happens. But probably a lot of fun, to be honest, because I haven't done it in a while, but canoeing and kayaking is something that my family does as well. So I think it's going to open it up, and it should be a huge improvement to the availability of the river for recreation. There is as Mike mentioned earlier, there is a Blueway study underway that the counties have supported. So it's kind of a little planning effort on where there could be put-ins and where, what stretches the river, could be accessible going forward. We have not included Rapidan Mill in that study, as I understand it, yet, because there's nothing to. It would be premature at this point to include it. But clearly, if there's a Blueway and it connects to and it's on the Rapidan, then this is going to come in play. So yeah, I have high hopes that if we get this resolved, that the recreational benefits will be improved dramatically too.
Jeff, hi, it's Gary Seal.
Gary.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about if you'd would consider dam removal or partial removal, how do you, I guess, mitigate the sediment from getting in the river downstream? I remember I grew up on the Robinson River, and I think it was sometime back in the 60s, they just blasted around the old power dam upstream from there.
Yep.
And it ruined the river permanently. I mean, it basically just altered the whole river downstream permanently because of the sediment that washed out and filled in the river. So, I mean, how does that process work? How do you mitigate any damage downstream and the flow of that sediment?
Right. So the way it's typically done as a best practice right now is that you do this very extensive mapping exercise to determine how much sediment is there and where is it. Then the engineering plan would include the physical removal of pieces of the dam in what order and at what speed to basically to slow release the sediment if that's required. Right. So sediment is you know, it's a natural part of every river. Whatever came down the river and got hung up at the dam is a part of the river, just like everywhere else in the river. So, you know, releasing it back into the river, you know, is still a, you know, is still an acceptable practice. What you want to be careful of, though, is you don't do it too fast, or you don't do it to the extent that it causes problems downstream that can't allow the river to recover fast enough and deal with that sediment. So, you know, below dams, very commonly, and that's the case with this one too, the impact of the dam is not just above the dam, it's also below the dam, because the dam is trapping sediment. That sediment is not allowed to restore the natural flow of sediment down the banks. So you wind up below the dam, you wind up with a wider, flatter fan, essentially, below the dam. So I'm sure some of that sediment, as it comes back from behind the dam, is going to recover that, or help recover that fan below the dam as well. Whatever happens to it, there's going to be a really extensive replanting and restoration project to go with it. That's going to be a requirement, I'm sure. And the Center for Natural Capital will be, you know, very much involved in that process. So, yeah, it's not going to be a blow it up and walk away kind of operation. It's, you know, will be a slow release. They'll take out pieces. Once everything settles, then we'll have a crew go in and start doing the replanting work to try and stabilize the banks, both above and below the dam site. To answer that enough?
Sorry about that. I had to take myself off of mute, but yeah, that's a good answer. That's a consideration.
Well, hey, Jeff, you might just talk about the, and this is just very preliminary, but we already had one boat went out, and they did, they checked the sediment at the dam and all the way back up to where it was slack water. You know, and I think that was an interesting finding. It's just a very early one, but you know, we are in this due diligence phase. And again, I just want to emphasize this, that, you know, the truth still is that we could find something in this due diligence phase that I don't know if it would be, you know, a showstopper legally or anything like that, but it could be a showstopper because of cost and just, you know, sort of feasibility.
Yeah.
So there's nothing about this that's saying at all that at this point that any modification of any type is definitely going to happen. But a few weeks ago, we had the first sort of findings come out from this due diligence. You want to just talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Because it speaks to this sediment issue that Gary and Beth were bringing up.
That's a good point. Good point. So yeah, we had the Department of Wildlife Resources, one of our partners here that we're working with, offered up their boat and crew to go out and do some really preliminary depth finding data collection, with the thinking that we needed to know if the sediment plume that hangs behind the dam, how deep is it and how big is it? So they went out and took sonar readings all the way up to the edge of the edge of the dam. They
almost up to the Robinson.
Well, yes, they ran all the way up to the Robinson, but they also ran all the way down to, within about 15 feet of the dam itself, right. Which is where the sediment slide will be hung up. So the depths they were finding right behind the dam, 15, 20 feet behind the dam were, up to 12 feet. Well, it's a 12-foot dam. So what that tells me is there's a whole lot of scouring has gone on over the years. So this dam doesn't have nearly the sediment problems that other dams have seen. I was involved with one on the Pig River down in Rocky Mountain, Virginia, a number of years ago. And the sediment they pulled out of that operation was just astonishing. We're not anywhere near that kind of a problem. The thinking is, at this point, based on what we know, is that, yeah, there's some sediment back there, particularly pushed up on the Culpeper side.
Right.
The river bends slightly right there. It's subtle, but you can see it when you're standing on the bank, and it bends towards the Culpeper side. So the water speed is higher on the Culpeper side, so that means sediment is falling out on the orange side, so it's falling out on the Culpeper side. So anyway, the obvious way to do that is to start picking away at the dam, draw the water down, and then go in and re-veg the Culpeper side as quickly as possible to trap as much of that sediment as you can up there. How successful we'll be at that, it kind of remains to be seen. But I don't see it as a huge showstopper relative to the other dams that have already been removed in the state where they've had this problem. They dealt with it. There's been one recently in Lexington, Virginia. There's one down near Richmond that had way worse problems than what we've got.
Quick question. We've got a couple more minutes before we have to close it out, about probably another 10 minutes. Okay. Can you talk about any community-oriented efforts to help you all in this phase of your work, or is it really you've just got a lot of grunt work to do and you can't use the community, or if it's just funding? Sure.
So we've reached out to the community members for sure, some of the landowners in particular, but it's so preliminary at this point. It's kind of hard to, I could call a community meeting. What would I tell them? that we're working, it's basically we're trying to gather data. So what I'd really hoped was we'd have something to show to the community before you got everybody ramped up to do meetings and whatnot. This has dragged on long enough now, though, that I think we're going to have to go ahead and start setting up some of those meetings to get it started. Even if we don't have all the information we'd like to have when we go to talk to people. So yeah, we definitely want to keep the community involved and informed, and we're committing to do that.
Can I ask a question? And I'm going to probably need a little help in figuring out how to frame this. But the Blue Way project, which I don't know if this ends up being a subset of that, what impact it has on the overall aspirations for developing the Blue Way. Right. But maybe, I guess, Mike, I don't know if you'd be the one to address this, but where are you on that initiative? And there would be a question in terms of community involvement of, well, maybe you could just give us a status report on where you are with that initiative.
Sure, Ellen. Right. So where we are is we have for over a year, been evaluating the potential to have an access point at Liberty, and then going downstream at Madison, and then further down, or Spicers and Madison. In the last year, in evaluating Liberty, we had willing landowners that were, said, we're willing to negotiate something to have an access point there. Topographically, sort of logistically, it was a lot of positive, a lot of thumbs up. A lot of that made sense up there for lots of reasons. So then when we moved down to Spicers, if you're floating down from Liberty, as you all know, you got to get over the diversion barrier, or you got to get out of the river, at the diversion barrier. If you want to continue your trip, you've got to portage over it somehow. The diversion barrier is not going anywhere. So that was another thing we had to look into. So Spicers, it really became two projects. One was a potential put-in point, and another one was, can you portage there to continue a trip down to Madison? When we did our due diligence, landowner meetings about portage, that was multiple thumbs down. Supportive landowners, understanding landowners, wanted, to have the recreational benefits for folks to be able to utilize the river in an expanded way for recreation. They thought that would actually help have more eyes on the river. It was all positive, but on the Madison side, at the end of the day, we just could not get any kind of an agreement to portage on the Madison side. On the Orange side of the diversion barrier, that is also very problematic. It's a choke point in the river right there. There's a cliff on the Orange side right before the diversion barrier. Even if you were to somehow engineer something to get out there, you're getting out right where the fish ladder is. The fish ladder with the baffles on it, if a child were to fall down into that, that is just us as sort of a group that's looking at facilitating this, that was just an immediate red flag. So again, and sort of thinking about the Blue Way as a phase one thing, we have said for the time being, Liberty's not a potential access point. In terms of the put-in side of it, we started talking to Larry Silverman. Larry Silverman family owns the parcel and actually owns a pump house, and they owns a parcel that's just downstream of that. We have an LOI, a letter of intent with the Silverman family. Larry is totally supportive about having just a small access point there, which would come in right where the guardrail is across from the water treatment plant, and go down into a little parking area, and then probably enter through a slide into Poplar Run, not actually into the Rapidan, because there's boulders and stuff like that. Again, that's just a huge project. And so it appears to be a thumbs up from a feasibility perspective for a put-in at Spicers. You get down to Madison. And I might just add too, we met with VDOT, we met with DEQ. There's no issues there in terms of, yes, there's a turn, the steep access there at Spicers, but VDOT said, no, that's not an issue. Don't worry about that. It's low speed. DEQ said no issue putting a road down next to Poplar Run. Go down to Madison, met with VDOT. VDOT owns the access point there. We looked at other areas. Those all had, when I say other areas, other, sort of corners of where the river is right there on 15. Kept coming back to the VDOT old bridge site. And so that's what we're focusing on now. Again, they're at each of these points, there's concerns, but overall that seemed to be feasible. There's some landowner concern, but there are also landowners that are supportive. All that's got to be worked through. So where we are now is we flew with a drone, both of those areas. We've flown it twice. We threw it once with leaf on. It didn't work. Fortunately, we went back, and just a few weeks ago, we flew it again. We got great photography. And so now John James has maps, and he's now doing a preliminary design for a put-in at Spicers and a takeout at Madison. Once we get those done, we're going to probably through Zoom here in the next month or so. We'll have one of those exploratory group meetings. We can talk more about that. And then I hope to see if we can wrap up the feasibility study by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Because we're about at the end of our time here. If not,
Can I ask a quick one, Jamie?
Yeah, please, Bob.
You mentioned, I think at the onset of the meeting, when you showed the historic photo of the actual mill itself, possibly, excuse me, plans for that on the horizon at some time. And, could you elaborate on that just a little bit for us, just because we're, you know, in the neighborhood, drive across.
Sure,
most of
sure.
Thanks.
Mike, you want to do that? Or you want me to?
Both do it. I'll sort of take a first crack at it. So, you know, the Center for Natural Capital, we're a 501c3, and our what our focus is on the health, creating a more healthy people, you know, human communities, wildlife communities, more healthy landscapes, and a more healthy climate. And we do that through a variety of business or business-like programs that are all synergized that we create. With that kind of a mindset, our interest in working with the owners at the mill is to repurpose it for what was originally designed for. Its original architecture. And so we're looking at things like bringing in heirloom grain milling as a niche business. Those kinds of more sustainably purposed industrial activities that are consistent with that history and that heritage. You all probably know that, you know, since Orange Madison Co-op abandoned the property in the 90s, and there's been talk about wanting to do apartments and all this stuff. That is not at all, as far as to whatever extent the center is driving the process. For our board, for our advisors, and for staff, that kind of a thing we're to have no interest in that. It's repurposing it for what it was originally intended in a more modern, more, you could say, sustainable, ecologically friendly, regenerative agriculture kind of context.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Jeff and Michael, for making your time available today, and everyone who joined us. Appreciate it. Just a quick note that in 2 weeks, on the 16th of February, Rotary will be holding another session similar to this. The topic will be the Love Outreach Food Pantry in town. If any of you are not familiar with Love Outreach, we're going to do a tour, discuss the sources and uses of funds and foodstuffs and all this sort of thing. Should be really enlightening, and it is a valuable part of our community. So we're very interested in doing that. And I hope, Jeff and Michael, that we'll be able to do this kind of a round table once again. And once you have some more information that you want to share with the community, Rotary would really enjoy being the conduit to help you get that information out.
Okay. You know, Jamie, this just occurred to me, but maybe we'll have the exploratory meeting with some of those stakeholders on the Blue Way, and then maybe we'll do this again in a few months if Rotary wants, and just focus on the Blue Way.
That'd be great.
That's just an idea. So
that'd be great. We certainly, there's a lot of interest in this, and I've recorded the session. If anyone is interested, I'll see if I can post it up onto our website. Failing that technological advancement, you can email me directly. But my thanks to everyone. David,